Good morning, everyone. Welcome to GelCar. I see we do have a quorum. If someone who was at the previous meeting could discuss the minutes.
I will move to accept.
Second.
All right. Any discussion on the minutes? All right, those in favor?
Aye.
And I will abstain because I wasn't at the last meeting. All right, alternates. We've got me. Don't need very many alternates. Lang, Chanley, Innes, Ward. All right, we are all regular members. Congratulations on our attendance. It is. It's kind of random who you'll get. Okay, the consent agenda. Does anyone have something to come off the consent agenda?
Hearing none. Hearing none, I move for adoption of the consent agenda.
Director Morrow?
There are two items on the regular agenda that are placed there mistakenly. They should be on the consent agenda. The first is 2024-5 EXRF. The other is 2024-105.
Both of those are on the agenda.
They are on the
being on
website.
the consent agenda.
Yes, they are on the paper one, but if you look at the meeting packets, they are not.
Okay. Right, those are the ones that we decided at the last minute should be on consent. So if anyone is confused, see Director Morrell. All right, any discussion of the consent agenda? All right, hearing none. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, consent agenda
Who
is
was the
adopted.
second?
Representative Schmidt.
Anyone, pick somebody.
Oh, I heard Peter, so. All right, regular, the Installation Standards Board.
All right, so the reason this is on the regular agenda is because the rules are expired. They expired in 4 of 22, and PLC 10223 didn't take effect until August of 23. So there was a big gap in between the expired rules and the new fee rules. So GelCar may have questions about fees that may have been collected.
Yes, we do have such a question. Can you answer them, Ms.?
Yes, Tina Kelly, Rules Coordinator, Office of Professional Licensure and Certification. Good morning. No fees were collected during that time and no actions were taken on any a licensee or applicant.
Really, for 2 years, nobody applied and no discipline?
That is what I asked the people from each of those sections, and that was what I was communicated.
Well, that sounds like we ought to look into whether we really need that board if they can go for 2 years with nobody
Why?
dealing with them.
I can't say whether or not anybody applied. What I can say is no fees were collected.
No fees were collected. Okay, thank you. That is simpler. All right, thank you very much. Is there any other questions or comments?
Move to approve.
Okay, moved by Senator Lang, seconded by
I'll say.
Senator Chanley.
Innes.
Innes, okay, sorry. He's hiding. Any further discussion? Those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Department of Energy.
So this is proposal 2024-28. It's Energy 800, the Underground Utility Damage Prevention Program. The agency did file an amended conditional approval, which addressed all my substantive comments. However, there is a note to the committee regarding a reference to the Energy 200 rules. Those have not been filed with our office yet. As of right now, my understanding is that the department is using the PUC 200 rules, which they're allowed to do under RSA 12P14. However, that statute only allows the department to use any of their existing rules until the rules expire, are repealed, are amended or a period of 5 years has passed, whichever occurs first. And our office did receive a proposal from the PUC to amend their 200 rules. So once that is adopted, the Department of Energy will no longer be able to use those rules. So there is a bit of a question about what rules they will be using and how far out they are of creating their own 200 rules. I had a very brief conversation with the agency before the meeting, and it sounds like should the PUC rules be adopted before any energy 200 rules are put into effect, the agency will then rely on the Justice 800 rules. But there's still a question about how soon they will have their own 200 rules in place.
Good morning. You probably want to turn your microphone on. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is David Shulock. I'm the General Counsel at the Department of Energy. We do have a plan for adopting new 200 rules. There is a substantial draft already done. And we intend to go to stakeholder sessions in November, right? And those would be informal stakeholder sessions to make sure that our regulated community is not adversely affected by the procedural rules that we adopt. We had originally intended with the PUC to do these rules later on, right? Because, we have many rule sets that we have to adopt or revise and adopt after the reorganization. And we plotted those out based upon expiration date, essentially. And then, the 800 rules were a matter of opportunity. We had an attorney who was able to do those rules. Those got moved ahead just a little bit. But everything is done by expiration date. And because the 200 rules didn't expire, those were planned to do later, which would not have an adverse effect on the regulated community because they're accustomed to using those rules. And actually changing them might cause them a little bit more work than keeping them. So we plan to go to stakeholder sessions in November.
Okay, any Representative Brody, you have a question? I'm kind of concerned that if these are the practice and procedure rules, correct?
That's correct.
And from my limited understanding, you should be able to just take the PUC rules, change a few addresses, and adopt them as your rules because you're not changing your practice or procedure very much. Is that correct? Or am I mistaken in something?
Well, we do have to make some changes to the rules because in the reorganization, some things were jointly given to the two agencies. Some things are given to both agencies and some things are just given to one agency. So there's some sorting out to do.
Okay,
Yeah.
fine, so
Yeah.
should take a little thinking to sort it out, but
Yeah.
other than that, these should be the easiest rules for you to do.
You might think that, but we had rules that were going to expire and we had to focus on those. Right.
Absolutely, I appreciate that.
And there are over 20 rule sets, right, that we have to do this for. And that's the order that we're taking them in.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, I can understand. Senator Lang.
Thank you. Maybe it's for our attorneys in the room, but again, my question is, I think you said 200's expired or is not enforceable anymore, and yet the rules they're using are saying that they have to do their hearings pursuant to the rules that are expired. Did I misunderstand something?
So right now, they can use the PUC 200 rules. They are not referenced in this rule set. They actually cite to the Energy 200 rules, not the PUC 200, but under the statute, they can still use the PUC 200 until PUC readopts their rules, which they are in the process of doing at the moment. We have their initial proposal already.
And,
Does that follow up? So again, the concern is we adopt their 200 rules before they have their 200 rules ready for energy, and now we have a conflict of some sort.
Right, because Energy wouldn't be able to use those anymore. So they would have to either
It
have their
sounds-
own rules in, or the Justice 800 rules are kind of a
Generic.
template, generic procedural rules that agencies can use, but there are certain procedures that need to be in place before they can use those. So as long as the department does that, they can then potentially use the Justice 800 rules in the meantime. But once again, yes, these rules still just cite to the Energy 200 rules, which are not,
Don't exist.
they're not in existence.
This sounds like when we separated the departments, the two departments did not coordinate their rulemaking efforts.
So the two departments had very little notice that there was going to be a reorganization. If you remember, it went through the budget cycle and not through the legislative cycle.
I'm well aware of that.
After the reorganization, we did coordinate. We had meetings with the Department of Justice, with representatives from the department for both the Department of Energy and the PUC. We worked out schedules for doing the rules basically on this by expiration date schedule. We do coordinate a great bit. So when we do a set of rules, the department, because it had more resources, does a set of rules for the department and a set of rules for the commission. We do all that basic work for them. And then it goes to the commission and the Department of Justice to review to see whether we have appropriately divided the rules based upon the jurisdiction that we have under the revised statutes, right? Which is actually the hardest part to figure out, right? Then, we have proceeded to file our notices of rulemaking at the same time for sets of rules. The PUC, for whatever reason, decided to move ahead with its 200 rules. We've asked them not to do that, but they're doing it anyhow. The rules are a little bit problematic for us in what they've done because there are some rules that we absolutely rely on, such as probably the most important one is their rule for waiving other rules, right? Once they amend that, which they planned to do, we would no longer be able to waive anything, which can be quite a hardship on a regulated community or a ratepayer when they're coming in for some relief if we're not able to waive a rule appropriately. So we have asked them not to amend there are a number of rules that we absolutely rely on and that don't exist anywhere else. And they have agreed not to amend those. They're going to restructure their rulemaking so that those are not amended and readopted.
Okay. Would that solve the issue of them not having any rules in place?
No, it will not. So they do plan to proceed on the procedural rules for adjudications and rulemakings. And for those, that's where we would default to the justice rules. But
To clarify, should the PUC pull those sections out of their current proposal and not have them changed in any way or just readopted, then yes, the Department of Energy could still use those rules.
Okay, well then thank you. That sounds like an elegant way of solving it if you've identified specific ones that you need.
well, it doesn't resolve every problem.
Well,
The new PUC rules will have a fiscal impact on our agency. And so we need to work that out with them as well.
lovely. Representative Grote?
Thank you. So when do the PUC 200 rules expire? And when does your group plan on bringing your 200 rules to GELCAR? Is there an overlap or?
So 200 rules don't actually expire. What will trigger,
Rules of procedure.
what will trigger our inability to use them is when you actually approve the rules and they're adopted. At that point, we won't be able to utilize any rules that are amended, right?
All right. So is it possible then, excuse me, follow up?
Follow up?
Is it possible then to wait for the PUC to wait on their adoption of their rules until this group gets their rules completed so that we don't have that conflict?
So we have asked them to do that and they've
Okay.
said no.
But they have agreed to pull out a few specific rules that you
Yes.
absolutely need.
Yes.
All right, that is a start at least. We'll blame the hurriedness of the separation for the mess. But I do hope that you'll be able to accelerate the writing of your own 200 rules, so this you don't have to rely on the PUC leaving things alone.
Well, we did schedule them in advance of when we would have worked on them, but it won't, the stakeholder sessions won't start until November,
All right, thank you.
but it was going to be 2027. So we have moved them up.
That's beyond my term of duty, so. All right.
Move to approve.
All right, Senator Lang moves to approve. Senator Emmett seconds. Representative Brassey can sit in for Representative Leon, who won't be here. Any discussion, comments, questions? Those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, Board of Medicine.
So this is 2024-60. It's on examination requirements for physicians. And the only reason it is on the regular agenda is because it is expired in May of 2022. So there may be questions about how these exams were done. in
Good
that time.
morning.
Good morning, Chantal Wheeler, Rules Administrator, Office of Professional Licensure and Certification on behalf of the Board of Medicine.
So how on earth could you let your rules be expired for 2 years?
Well, that is a question I can't answer. Director Courtney has mentioned before, we have the new software system, so we are implementing that. We've been working with the boards carefully to identify expiring rules and start the rulemaking process. The statutory requirements for exams for the Board of Medicine is in RSA 32912, and they rule applications, have been processed according to the statute under that.
Senator Lang?
The new rule is basically the same as the old rule, just being readopted.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I understand there's no fees in this one, so you don't have to worry about that issue.
Not this time.
Move to approve.
All right. Then move to approve. Any discussion, comments, questions? Those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. And when is your next rulemaking starting on? Do you have any other expired rules? That's the.
Yes.
And you are in the midst of rulemaking on them, I trust?
We are, yes.
All right. Well, we'll see you again, I'm sure.
Thank you.
All right. The Opioid Abatement Trust Fund.
All right, so this is item 2024-112. The agency did file a conditional approval request, which did address a majority of my comments. However, I still had one unclear comment on page 3 of the conditional approval text regarding the reports that need to be filed. Under the statute, it is required that the applicants and government entities file an annual report and that they do so by September 1st of each year. However, the way that this particular rule is written, it then goes on to say that the department could require more frequent submissions. Now, there's not a question that the department could require this. They can absolutely do so. Just the fact that it's kind of put under the annual report makes it a bit unclear, because the annual report is under the statute says annual, so they need different authority in order to ask for those different submissions. And additionally, there was a question of how frequent is frequent. They needed some criteria to establish when exactly they would be asking for additional reports. The agency and I did have some discussions, and some draft language was made that I believe they are going to orally amend their conditional approval request with that language. And if they do so, then that would address my comment.
Good morning.
Good morning, Allison Radmay, Administrator for the Administrative Rules Unit at the Department of Health and Human Services.
Good morning, Attorney Robin Guarino. I'm an attorney for the Department of Health and Human Services.
And that is correct. Before coming in here this morning, we are all in agreement. There was 2 sets of proposed language, and I know we have agreed on that we're going to agree on set number 1, which will split out the current A as written into A and B, and kind of expand on B a little bit for the additional reports.
Okay. Could you read that to us so we can?
Oh, sure.
understand
Sorry.
what
Yeah.
you want
Yeah,
us to
sure.
approve?
You want us to vote on it?
Absolutely.
Please.
Okay, so the new A will be applicants and governmental entities shall submit an annual report outlined in RSA 126-A :84 IV. I apologize, I'm awful with Romans. To the department by September 1st of each year. The new B will be if the department's rules, grant contracts, or memoranda of understanding require a more frequent submission, the applicants and government entities shall submit the report in A above more frequently than once a year. The department shall determine the frequency of submission based on compliance with the department's rules, grant contracts, or memoranda of understanding. And then we will re-letter the existing paragraphs.
I do have a concern that allows you to ask them to put that report in every week or every day. What's your expected frequency? Every quarter or every month?
Thank you for asking that question. From a practical standpoint, asking for such a report every day or every week is just more than the department, I'm sure, can bear. I think that there's not necessarily an anticipation of asking for reports at this point more frequently than annually. Just the idea of keeping the option open, because department may have certain vendors who are approved that they might want to keep a closer eye on, either because they're new to the market, not necessarily have been in business quite a while. I can't see the department, and again, this would be speculation on my part, but I can't see the department asking for anything at the worst case scenario more than monthly, and I just don't see that happening. I think more reasonably it might be biannually, and maybe even quarterly, but I don't even necessarily see that happening with the weight that they bear.
Can you reread B for me?
Sure. Okay, so B, if the department's rules, grant contracts, or memoranda of understanding require a more frequent submission, the applicants and government entities shall submit the report in A above more frequently than once a year. The department shall determine the frequency of submissions based on compliance with the department's rules, grant contracts, or memoranda of understanding.
So the second half of that sentence was the one I was not concerned with, but I was trying to understand. Again, that talks about if you have an issue with a vendor, whatever that may be, it talks about whether they're in compliance or not. So you may have had an issue with a vendor, and this would allow you to keep closer tabs on that vendor that might have had a disciplinary type of action and make
Correct.
them keep their data up faster and sooner so you don't have the problem go on again.
Correct.
Any other questions?
Move to approve?
I'll second.
All right, moved by Senator Lang, seconded by Representative Broda. Any comments or questions? All right. So the motion is to
Conditionally approved.
conditionally approve the conditional approval request.
Mhm.
And those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, thank you very much, and thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, the last of our business is a emergency rule, also from Health and Human Services, which is a discussion item, other than there's the, another one.
This emergency rule came in last week. It relates to youth recreation camps, dealing with RSA 126U and HEC 901. It deals with restraints at youth camps, youth recreation camps. The statute forbids such restraints for ordinary camps, but it does allow that for state facilities. The concern that I had regarding this is what the emergency is at this moment. Why is this different from 2 months ago or last year? Particularly given that there are only probably a couple of weeks left in the camp season.
Yes.
Good morning. Again, Allison Radmay, the administrator for the Administrative Rules Unit at the Department of Health and Human Services.
Good morning. My name is Doreen Shockley. I'm the manager of the Bureau of Licensing and Certification at the department, and I appreciate the question. Currently, the youth recreation program rules don't specify that restraint and seclusion practices are prohibited at camps. So this emergency rule will expressly prohibit that from occurring. We had received questions from some of the youth camps if this applied to them, and we wanted to make sure that they all knew they can't restrain and seclude. We do have camps that run all year round to the point about them ending in a couple weeks. We have some that are spring, some that are summer, some that are fall, some that are winter, some that are all year round. It's also important to note that we have been working collaboratively with the camps all year to enter into regular rulemaking. And this will also, they'll have an opportunity during the regular rulemaking for any public comments or hearing that, because there'll be a public hearing at that time. We anticipate submitting the final rules probably in September so that when the new camp season starts for the bulk of the summer camps in May-ish, it will already be part of the regular rulemaking.
Any other questions, comments? Director Morrow?
This requirement regarding restraints or prohibition on restraints is already in statute. It's simply not, the issue, I guess, is it's simply not in the rules, and there may be some confusion among camp owners. But I'm not sure whether that constitutes an emergency or not, which is up to the committee to decide.
So, if I may also add on to that, so RSA 126U and HEC 901 does not include camps, so they're not part of the required reporting. That's would be schools and residential youth, childcare, residential facilities, but camps are not part of that unless.
So the question is that the statute does not specifically include recreation camps, and some of the camps are concerned that they might not be able to?
No. So let
mean,
me try to. So right now, camps want to know if they have to report when they restrain and seclude, according to 126U. The point is they cannot restrain and seclude. This isn't about reporting. They're not trained. There's specific training required in both of those statutes that camps aren't trained to do. We do not want people, staff at camps, restraining or secluding our youth. That's why it's an emergency.
And there is no reporting requirement since there is no action that would require reporting, correct?
Correct. But currently, there's nothing that prohibits it. So they could, in fact, be restraining and secluding children and not reporting it.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Director Morrow?
I would have to disagree regarding there not being a statutory requirement. RSA 170E 34 Roman 1I requires the commissioner to adopt rules for compliance with RSA 126U regarding the use of physical and medication restraint. So there is a statutory requirement in place, but I admit it's an entirely different chapter, and I can see where people might not be aware of
Well,
it.
but that doesn't say that the camps can't
Right.
seclude or restrain. It simply says the commissioner has to have rules, and they're trying to do
Right.
so. Is that,
I stand to be corrected, but I think 126U says, one of the statutes says that restraints can only be used by state entities.
Not familiar. You mentioned that earlier in your testimony. I'm not familiar with what you're referring to there. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That was a surprise.
Senator?
Again, I think this falls under public safety,
Thank
right?
you.
In general,
Yes.
if you're the kid that's getting restrained, you probably, or camp, right? You're putting it at risk. And I think knowing what the rules are very important. And granted, it just came to light that this didn't exist, and it's important to get it done while you go about your regular rulemaking process. So I'm okay with this completely.
Senator
Thank you.
Chandler?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding about the way camps are regulated is certainly incomplete. But I do know at one time this was the purview of DES and has recently, fairly recently, gone under the consideration of DHHS. I think there are probably a number of questions that still are to be answered. Perhaps it might be necessary to look at this statutorily at some point, but I can live with this emergency rule at this point. So thank you for bringing
Thank
this
you.
forward.
Anyone else? Yeah, I'd like to say that I'm interested in what will come out of the regular rulemaking, but I don't think it can hurt anybody to clarify that they are not to restrain or seclude children.
Thank you very much.
All right. We don't have to take any action because it's an emergency rule, but we will look forward to the permanent rule.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Oh, yes, the equalization manual letter.
So the equalization manual from the Department of Revenue Administration, for those committee members who were not here in 2022 or just, it was 2 years ago, so also just a refresher. The Revenue 2800 rules came before the committee. There was some discussion about whether or not the equalization manual had to be incorporated or could be incorporated by reference or had to be in the rule text. It was our office's opinion that it needed to be in the rule text and could not be incorporated because it was a document that's essentially made for the Department of Revenue Administration by the assessment board, which is administratively attached. It essentially gives the department and municipalities requirements on what to do when they are doing an equalization of property values. So during that discussion, it was agreed that trying to put the requirements in the rule text was very difficult for the agency because putting it out in rule text, it wasn't in compliance with the manual. There would have been a lot of work needed. So at the time, the committee approved the rules with the understanding that the department would go and get a statutory exemption to allow them to incorporate the manual by reference in their rules, which they did. However, back in June, I had a call from the clerk of the New Hampshire Board of Tax and Land Appeals, and she was inquiring about the incorporation by reference of the equalization manual in Revenue 2800. She could not get into the specifics at that time because it was an ongoing case before the board. She just wanted to know if we had an incorporation by reference statement for that particular rule set. And I was able to explain to her that we did not at that time because the committee allowed them to move forward and have it in their rules before the statutory exemption came, but now that they have the statutory exemption, they're allowed to incorporate by reference. After a couple weeks, end of July, I contacted the clerk again to see if the board had issued an order, because I was curious and wanted to follow up on this issue. And she did send me the written order that was given by the Board of Tax and Land Appeal. It was concerning to me because the department essentially took the position that the equalization manual was not a rule and that they did not have to strictly comply with it when doing this particular equalization. In fact, their director of municipal and property division is quoted in the order saying the equalization manual is not a statute, is not a rule. It's a guideline for the towns to use in the equalization process with the DRA. Rev 2801.04 has equalization manual defined as the equalization manual as approved by the New Hampshire Assessing Standards Board, and Revenue 2800-02.01 states explicitly that in addition to the requirements of RSA 21J9A, the department shall annually determine the total equalization valuation of properties in accordance with sections 1, 3, and 8 of the manual. That's why we had the whole discussion about whether or not this manual could be incorporation by reference, because it's specifically stated in the rules that this manual is a requirement that the department and municipalities have to follow. So now that this issue has come to my attention, I have concerns that there is some misunderstanding about what rules are and what the equalization manual is as a rule. So I drafted a letter to the department on behalf of the committee, which essentially outlines the committee's options that they could take at this point in time to address this issue should the committee be concerned about it. The first is that the committee could, during the next legislative session, remove the statutory exemption from statute and petition the department to then enter rulemaking to put it directly in their rules. The other requirement or the other option for the committee is that the committee could adopt a statute that simply says the equalization manual is to be followed, is, you know, the process that needs to be followed. So it's statutory as opposed to rules, and therefore there's no question about whether or not it needs to be followed. The other option is to petition the department without doing any statutory changes to just make it clearer that this is what needs to be followed and done, even though I don't see how that would take some thinking, because it's pretty clear to me that the rule says that.
Well, it strikes me that the issue is that one side of the DRA is saying the equalization manual is in the rule, and we and the towns must follow at least this part of it when we're doing an equalization. And another part is arguing before the Board of Tax and Land Appeals that, oh no, we don't have to follow our rules. And I think that's the concern, is that when challenged, they're not saying, oh, you know, you're right, we need to follow our own rules, and which specifically include the equalization manual. They're trying to get out of their own rules, and that's something that is up to the commissioner of the DRA to straighten out.
So
at least in my opinion.
And this draft letter could be a first step if the committee reviewed it and wanted to send it to the department, to the commissioner directly, to notify them that we are aware of this issue and we're concerned about this issue, and that should the issue not be addressed, further action may be taken as kind of a first step if you think the commissioner would be able to do some
Sounds like
internal.
it's entirely within his department. You know, I mean, his rules are perfectly clear that the agency has to follow these parts of the manual. It's in their rules that say so. Director Morrow?
I would just note that any material, whether entire document or portions of it, that are incorporated by reference are rules.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So it sounds like the DRA has a rogue entity that's out there, being sued by the towns for not following its own rules, and we ought to thank the town, well, at Moulton Borough, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
For bringing it to our attention that the DRA is not following its own rules.
Right, so this letter would start the process. It would notify the commissioner of DRA that there's a problem that the jail car is concerned with. We're obviously not going to send that letter until you guys agree that it's something we should do, but we think it's the next step to kind of put them on notice. Like, we see what you're doing, we see that you're not following your rules, and that's not acceptable.
Anyone else?
So,
Representative Schmidt.
thank you, Madam Chair. So you have referred to it several times as a draft letter, but by the same token, Attorney Munoz has said that the letter has been sent, so.
No, it has not been sent. No.
Well, if it hasn't been sent, wasn't there just a statement made that the commissioner has been notified?
The commissioner has not yet been notified.
This letter will notify the commissioner, and we can use that later.
Yeah, so I think we should do this because this is clearly an area of concern that should not be left unaddressed.
All right, any further discussion?
Move to recommend they file a letter, so it's an understanding that even Jalkar agrees that all the rules, those incorporated by reference, are rules and need to be followed.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right, those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, please send that letter, and we are interested in seeing what the DRA chooses to reply.
And if the committee would like, I could also, when I send it, talk with Revenues Council if you wanted to include this on the next month's agenda, just have them come in and maybe give a brief update on what action they've taken to address the issue.
We'd love to hear from them once they've done that. But yes, any response from the commissioner or the DRA would be very useful.
Okay.
All right, that's the last agenda item. Is there any further business? We will, of course, cancel the continued meeting since there doesn't seem to be any need for it.
There
Anyone
is
else?
nothing else.
All right, thank you. In that case, we are adjourned.